So I'm really, really happy to have a chance to talk with you all tonight. I do have a little PowerPoint presentation, but I'm hoping we can keep it informal and stop at any point. I don't care if I get through the whole thing. We'll go wherever you want to go. I'm mostly looking forward to hanging out and hearing what you have to say and some back and forth with you. And I'm sure I'll learn a lot from your experience. And part of our collective project here is to put theory and experience together. So let's just do that whichever way we possibly can. OK? So I wanted to start out with a little bit of an apology for being theoretical and just explain why I think theory is really important. OK? I think theoretical frameworks shape the way experts talk about social problems. And sometimes it's hard to get people to talk about care because they don't have a framework. You know, like, what is it? What's it about? You know, who's on which side? You know, how, you know, what are the arguments? I mean, it's sort of like a little bit, as a discourse, it's a little bit unfamiliar. But I think that's partly because economists are kind of jerks when it comes to care. They don't really think about it. They don't care about it. They don't really theorize about it. So from our side, from my side in academia, that's a problem. And I think it's also really important because it speaks to something that is very much happening in the real world, which is that we're kind of moving from a care economy in which gender differences were really, really completely dominant to one in which they're less dominant. They're still really important, but differences based on class and race, ethnicity, citizenship are becoming more salient. They're beginning to cross-cut those gender issues. And so it's, I mean, in one way it's a problem because, you know, it requires us to think in new ways about different kinds of inequality. But in another way it's an opportunity. It gives us a lens to think about how those forms of inequality intersect. And I think the purpose of theorizing about it is to try to process the differences among us and the conflicts that emerge in efforts to develop better collective care provision. And I think those are pretty significant. And so I think, you know, what is really motivating a lot of my efforts to theorize is really efforts to think about how to bring people together in constructive ways to solve the underlying problems. OK, so far? All right. I couldn't, you know, I sort of had a hard time figuring out, well, exactly how to package what I was going to do. And I realized that there were two different theoretical issues I wanted to broach tonight. And one is a kind of how economists conceptualize or fail to conceptualize, at least fail to conceptualize correctly, care provision. And I think this is really important for you, whatever your perspective, because it could give you a vocabulary with which to engage in debate with people who are going to run the same old you know, let markets work logic by you. So I want to be sure that I give you some tools to be able to, you know, whip ass when you get into a debate with mainstream economists about this and other issues. But I also know that some of you, at least, are interested in thinking about sort of the big theoretical picture about care and patriarchy, capitalism, globalization, and how that all comes together. So I am going to take some time just to lay out my pretty sketchy ideas about that, and that's another jumping off point. So these, I think, are complementary, but they're kind of two different, in a way, kind of talking two different languages, two different conceptual languages. But I think it'll be kind of a fun, I hope it'll be kind of a fun exercise. OK, well, what do we mean when we talk about care? What's always drawn me to the word is that it has both kind of positive connotations and negative connotations. And this is true in almost every language. And in fact, the nuances of the word are kind of different in different languages, but they almost always have this both positive and negative thing. And the positive thing is, you know, to be concerned or interested, to provide needed assistance, watchful supervision. So I care about you. That's such a plus, right? But care is also, especially when it's used as a noun, it's kind of a burden. You know, oh, you know, we have a lot of cares. You know, it's a burdened state of mind, mental suffering, grief. So in a way, to be concerned or interested in somebody is kind of a burden, right? OK, I think this is actually a clue, an important clue to care, the nature of care work. And you'll see how this spins out. But the point is just that you can love something and really value it and still feel burdened by it and worry about who's going to pay for it at the same time. And those two things are not contradictory. That's my main point. So there is a big literature now in the scholarly world about care work, and definitions do matter. So I just want to be sure that you are with me in terms of the definition I'm using. Oh, that, by the way, is a picture of me being cared for as a little 5-year-old. I don't know what I was thinking, but I was very well cared for a child. Okay, direct care work. Provision of services to another person in a face-to-face or hands-on or first-name relationship that implies some emotional connection and concern for that person's well-being. This is work where the quality of the service is likely to be affected by concern for the other person's well-being. And that distinguishes it from a lot of other forms of work. You know, when you sell a soda to somebody, the quality of the transaction is not affected by whether you care for them. But especially if the transaction involves a dependent, a person who's disabled or who's sick or who's frail and elderly or too young to take responsibility, then the concern for the well-being of that person affects the quality of the service that's being provided. So what this means, what this definition implies, is that market work can be care work, because a lot of us are paid to do work that actually involves some emotional connection. As a teacher, I feel like my job involves, you know, I do a better job if I care about my students, right? It's true for some relatively high paying jobs, like a lot of physicians, not all physicians, but some physicians do better quality work if they are connected, if they care for their patients. It's certainly true of child care workers and elder care workers that who are paid, that just because they're getting paid doesn't mean they don't have a strong emotional connection. But it's also true of a lot of unpaid work that we think of as taking place in the family. And you know, generally we focus a lot on people that really need assistance, like people that we call quote-unquote dependents. But it's also true that adults need care. And there's a certain amount required for us to get up out of bed every morning, and we don't function very well without it. So we shouldn't forget that part too, that it's not just dependence. So I think there's a little bit of a tendency in our cultural tradition to create a dichotomy. Like you do work either for love or for money. And in fact, that's a common phrase, for love or money. Are you doing this for love or for money? And banish that dichotomy, because almost everything we do has a little bit of both. Even if you're a parent and you're taking care of a child, you're staying home, you're not in paid employment, you're taking care of a child, you're often expecting somebody else, like the father of those kids, to help support you while you do it. You have to think about how you're going to support yourself. That's part of the human condition. So care is there's almost always some money component, even if it's just lurking in the background. And there's often love out front, even in an exchange, market relationship, which is what I was saying. So you gotta remind people that caregivers, do stuff out of love, but they need money to survive, and so you shouldn't take their love and affection as an excuse to pay them less. So I recently edited a book of kind of academic research on this topic, and I just love the graphic because it's sort of it captures for me a kind of multiracial circle of multi-age circle of social reproduction or something like that. I don't know. Okay, any questions so far? Good so far? Everybody with me? All right, this is sort of the most daunting slide. It's a grid, a 3x3 matrix that I think illustrates the contrast between the way economists think about the world and the way the rest of us think about the world. So at the columns, from the left to the right, are describing three different kinds of motives for workers. And it's a continuum. Again, it's not a dichotomy, it's a continuum. That's kind of in a way why I chose three columns. So you can be primarily seeking money or pecuniary reward. I don't know why economists call it pecuniary reward. It just means money. Reciprocity, you know, I do this for you, you'll do this for me. That's kind of a trade relationship. Or it could be motivated primarily by affection and concern with money in the background. Okay? And likewise, you can look at consumers in the rows. There's a gradation or a continuation of motives. Certain of what you want. You know, I want a Coke, I don't want a Pepsi. Or you could be uncertain of your needs. You could be seeing a doctor. Doctor, I don't know what I need, doctor. Tell me what I need. You know, give me a diagnosis and tell me what my options are. Or you could be, even further, not only lacking information to be an informed consumer, but needing some reassurance and emotional connection in order to get what you need. Like, you might not be able to explain to your doctor what you need unless you have confidence that that doctor is going to respect you and honor your needs and express some concern for your well-being, right? So if you look at the intersections between worker motivation and consumer motivation, that upper left-hand corner, that's what almost all textbook economics is about. Those market transactions, consumers know what they want, workers work for money, that's it. It's a very simple stylized world. Whereas at the opposite end of that rectangle there, the more emotional motivations of the worker intersect with the more emotional needs of the consumer, and that's where a lot of paid and unpaid work for dependence comes in. Okay, so it's just a kind of a way of formalizing what I've already said about the importance of emotion and personal connection. Okay? So now we get into kind of a more of an argument. Okay, why can't we just rely on markets? What's an example of relying on markets? Oh, well, we have a shortage of childcare. Let's lower immigration barriers so we could get some low-wage immigrants in, and that could solve our problem. And then more highly educated women could work as much as they want, and their children could get really high quality care at a very low cost. Okay, that's a sort of an example of a market solution to the childcare problem. Well, there's a bunch of reasons why we can't rely on markets alone, and not that we want to banish markets, but that we can't rely on them completely, that people who need care the most can't pay for it. Care responsibilities are costly. It's hard for individuals to anticipate their own needs. They don't have perfect information. Care quality requires some of that intrinsic motivation or emotional connection. And emotional attachment and moral values kind of limit the bargaining power of workers, and I'll say more about that in a minute. But also care has spillover effects on other people. So it's not just a transaction of buying and selling. It's a transaction of, that has a lot of implications for everybody in society because it affects the development of human capabilities. This is a little bit of maybe a little bit of a detour. I'm fascinated by the use of care in advertising. Have you noticed that a lot of ads use this word, care? In fact, there used to be customer service departments, and what are they called now?
Customer care.
Yeah, customer care. And Avis Cares, you know, it's sort of this rhetoric that is designed, that's used, that's appropriated precisely because the promise of care is kind of a promise. In this case, I think a kind of false promise of genuine concern. So there's even a gas tank on Route 9 that says, "We care." I actually called this number, and all I got was instructions about how to order more gas for the gas station. I don't really. Here's a customer care. I have an immense collection of this. Did you know the phrase "we care" has been trademarked? So too has the word, oops, let's see, we care, we care. We care more, that's also been trademarked. We care about you completely has also been trademarked. So I thought as a joke, it would be really interesting to trademark, I don't believe you really care. But it turns out it's kind of expensive, so I didn't do it. Okay. Okay, so there's some real benefits. Here's the paradox of care. There's some real benefits for consumers. What are the benefits? Well, you get higher quality. This emotional connection leads to higher quality. Sometimes a fancy word for that is incentive enhancing preferences. So if a childcare worker loves the child, if the nurse likes the patient, they're going to do a better job, and the child and patient get better care. Low cost, because people are often do take a pay penalty to enter a caring occupation. And if something happens, you can usually depend on care workers to kind of step in. They are very, willing to take up the slack, and that ends up having some real benefits for dependents. But this emotional connection that we all value and love so much, as in rock songs, you know how a lot of love songs use that that metaphor of chains, chain, chains of love. This is, I think, this was the first rock song I could find that used that chain imagery in 1931. Too weak to break the chains that bind me, I need no shackles to remind me I'm just a prisoner of love. Well, that's the contradictory aspect of care, that once you get attached, once you get involved in a caring relationship, in some ways you're held hostage by it, right? Because you're no longer just concerned about yourself, you're also concerned about the person that you're caring for. That limits your bargaining power. What's the essence of bargaining power? You don't like it, you walk away. Don't pay me enough, I'll go find another job, right? Can't do that if you're supporting young children. You're hostage to their needs. If you're in a job where you care about the people, you worry what will happen if you leave, you can't walk away. That's another reason why market wages are not going to reflect the real value of work. So I don't know why I like that picture. It's something about the mental responsibility, like thinking that you have responsibility for a small child. For a lot of women, in particular, there's a sense of, if I don't do this, nobody else will. And that sense of responsibility contributes to and complicates a lot of gender inequality. Contributes to occupational segregation as women move into care work, but also women taking a disproportionate share of care responsibilities. It's hard for them to bargain for less, but they've also internalized that sense of responsibility in a way. So, okay, now I feel like this is all getting kind of obvious. The result of these low market wages is that you have a lot of turnover in care jobs because people can't support themselves, and that lowers the quality of care, which affects care recipients and everybody who comes into contact with them, in a sense that there's a kind of multiplier effect or domino effect of that high turnover, and these low wages and a not enough provision of the public goods that come from care. And I think another really unfortunate tendency is that people figure out, oh, it's really dangerous to specialize in care because you get hooked into this system where it's hard to get out. And so you discourage yourself and other people from taking on care responsibilities. Like, I know some parents who don't like their daughters to babysit. Their sons, they're great, happy to let their sons go babysit, but they don't want their daughters to babysit. Why not? Well, because they figured out that the gender role thing, that women specialize in care, and in child care in particular, can turn into an economic liability. So again, I think it's really important to realize that some of these aspects of norms of care are very much internalized, and they're embedded in cultural norms and personal preferences. Some people even argue that there are sort of personality traits that we identify as masculine and feminine that play a part in this. My favorite example of this phenomenon is that there's a personality trait that is identified as a masculine trait called Machiavellianism. Does anybody know what anybody want to shout out what Machiavellianism implies as a personality trait?
Me first.
Not just me first, but yeah, thank you. That's perfect. Me first and screw you. Okay, well, of all of the personality traits on the list, which one do you think is associated with highest earnings? Machiavellianism, right? I mean, it's a fancy name for selfishness, right? But that is what, that's a quality, that seems to be a trait that's rewarded in the labor market. And it's a highly gendered trait. It's something that is generally regarded as distasteful in women, and to me, distasteful in men, but is generally more positively has more positive valence where men are concerned. That's
Thank goodness that's not true in the financial sector.
yeah, really. Yeah, it is sort of a summary of the financial sector, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, so I think care is still highly gendered, but gender roles, in my view, are really changing, and care is becoming a little bit degendered. And I know I can't persuade you just with 2 photographs, but here's an image from Fortune magazine in early 2000, and I believe this is sort of a stigmatizing picture of a stay-at-home dad. I think it makes him look kind of, what?
Dopey.
Dopey. That is a great description. He looks really dopey, and they've dressed him up to accentuate that, right? Whereas look on the right, oh, that is so different. It's highly sexualized, right? Young man, dad, he's so cool, you want him, you know? So this is an indicator of cultural change. So I'm not saying that, I mean, I think that the consequences remain to be seen, but things are moving in terms of the gendering of care. Yeah, Lynn?
But in both cases, both of those pictures are saying this may be happening, but it's not good. This one
No, the new.
is saying by dopey, this one is saying it's time to rethink.
No, but it's time. No, but actually, the article itself is very positive. Like, rethink masculinity should be, being a dad is very sexy and masculine. So it's rethink masculine.
Endangered species is okay.
The traditional male is an endangered species, and that's good.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, yeah. You're right. That if you just look at the subtitle, it does seem the same, but there is more. And I really see this among the younger generation. My students are so. Like their views are just so much less gendered about parenting in particular, but also care in general. So that is part of the reason that other forms of collective conflict are intensifying around care. There's now, as women have entered paid employment, there are greater economic differences among women. So you have a lot of women who are individually, in terms of their earnings, in the top 20%, if not in the top 1%. There's still not very many up there, but there are a lot of professional and managerial women in up there high. And a lot of those women are basically outsourcing their care responsibilities to lower wage women. So that's bringing class, race, ethnicity, citizenship kind of in. The state is playing a bigger role in financing care provision not just through education at both ends, expanding college and early childhood education, but also through health care, and that's what, obviously a huge political divide in the country today around financing care provision. And there's this large reserve army of potentially low-wage caregivers in developing countries, and that's kind of shaping some aspects of the debate over immigration, which has some very contradictory effects. But still, the gender differences are really important, and I think that actually contributes to some possibilities for building coalitions. And I think, in general, the aspects of femininity that we have traditionally valued at the same time that we've been unwilling to pay for them and support them are still very much a part of our cultural discourse. And you hear that, I think, in efforts to appeal to the need to invest in the younger generation, that will pay off, appeals to the basic health care as a human right. And there's a lot of this, I think, driving the fact that women are generally much more likely to vote Democratic than men are, because the Democratic Party has much more fully embraced a kind of commitment to public care provision. Yeah, Lynn?
Did you say what you mean by collective conflict? At the top?
Oh, collective conflict? I think conflict between groups based on a sense of collective identity. I'm a man,
As opposed to
you're a woman,
between individuals.
I'm white, you're a person of color,
Okay.
I'm a citizen, you're not a citizen. Yeah, as opposed to, I'm taking out the garbage, you're supposed to
Right.
cook dinner. Yeah. Okay, so, this is just my favorite all-time Norman Dog cartoon. mommy, daddy have decided it's cost effective to raise you with foreign labor, so we're shipping you to Mexico. So it turns out we don't have to ship children to Mexico because we can ship childcare workers here. Okay, so here ends the first part of the first theory. Okay, and the summary is just care is rewarding, also costly. Both individuals and groups often try to offload care costs onto others because of their costliness. They want to do just enough, they want to do a certain amount themselves to maintain the emotional connection and sense of self, but up to a point, no more. Okay, social institutions, including social norms, including gender norms, shape the distribution of the cost of care. And disempowered groups are often forced to bear the burden. So I think you can make this argument kind of using a pretty mainstream economic vocabulary. It works, and I think it's a consistent story. So, any questions? Yes?
Dr. Folbre, in your just one or two panels before that, you said the state is playing a bigger role.
Yeah.
I thought that's what was going to happen over the last couple of decades, but my perception is not that. That in fact, the private sector and the people in the unpaid or low-paid roles
Or doing more.
More and more on their own. How to take care of children.
I hear what you're saying.
After school and
Yeah.
Preschools.
Right.
And
I hear what you're saying, but I think, actually this
should be working. They didn't create a bunch of complete child care institutions to take good care of the children who were going to be left behind. So you probably have statistics that show that?
Well, let me explain why I think your view and my view are actually not inconsistent. In terms of sort of per capita care provision, it's true there have been cutbacks in the level of government services for especially some very disempowered groups of the population. Welfare reform would be an example of that, or efforts to cut food stamps, which are probably, or cuts in Head Start. There are a lot of that. But look at the demographics of the population. The population is aging, so the demands of Social Security and Medicare on the total budget are going up, and they're going to continue to increase. Health insurance, we are moving towards not a very satisfactory, but a universal health insurance system. We are moving in that direction. There's still a tremendous unmet need for childcare, but a lot of states have moved in the direction of universal pre-K for four-year-olds. A lot of sort of surprising states like Oklahoma and Georgia. And I think there's a reason for this. I think there's economic pressure and an economic logic to socialize more of the cost of care, but it's creating this huge pushback and huge political struggle. And in fact, one of the things I wanted to come around to at the end was the importance of thinking not just about care work, which is where I think a lot of the discussion is, but looking at care financing. Because that's a lot of what we're arguing about today in the US, about health care and pensions and education.
Yeah, I mean, look at the state budget. The university system is minuscule compared to the amount spent on health care by the state.
Yeah, and in fact, that's a good example of what is happening is the different constituencies are getting pitted against one another in the whole picture. Okay, well, let me just give you this, I promise you it's really quick. My hasty illustrated guide to care, patriarchy, capitalism, and globalization. And then we'll come back to this finance thing, because I think it fits. Okay, this is my view. Not everybody agrees with this, and it's a very interesting debate, and we can talk more about it. I think capitalism tends to slowly weaken patriarchal systems. I think wage-based employment that's based on individual market work and not family work tends to give women more individual bargaining power. Both wage employment and fertility decline give women some empowerment, differs by a lot of factors, race, class, citizenship, country, everything. I'm just talking about a general trend and mostly about the US experience. women engage in some collective political action, the rise of feminism. Feminism has a very real impact on public policy. So I think patriarchy gets weakened. But capitalism, in my view, remains very dependent on it. So the weakening is limited. It's only kind of, it gets to the surface. It doesn't go very deep, okay? And
Is that a real ad?
yeah, it's a famous ad from the like 1980s for British Airways. I think it's kind of fabulous. It shows you something about care, right? That what British Airways is promising you is with a seat in a first class is a woman kind of out of the 1950s wearing a cashmere sweater who's going to cuddle you like a baby. Isn't that what it's saying? Although there's a little humor in it too, because it's also kind of a little bit poking fun at the sleeping executive whose head is pasted onto the baby.
I was hoping he was a senator.
Yeah, really. The new Club World Cradle seat, lullaby not included. So sort of that, marketing, people need care, so you want to market it, right? That's what happens. Okay, but so in what ways is capitalism still really dependent on patriarchal values and a patriarchal system? Well, they're kind of, because care can't be shifted completely to the market, you need to have families. If you're going to have families, you need to provide some basic supports for them. So the welfare state socializes some of the costs of caring for dependents, and the welfare state takes on some of these responsibilities that were once provided by the family, because you need it. You need to reproduce your labor force. You need to provide at least some minimal level of care. But notice that the whole discussion of the welfare state is very gendered. So when we talk about the welfare state, it's sort of capitalism versus the welfare state. And capitalism is the guy, young guy, red-headed guy with his convertible, with his coat over his shoulder. You can actually buy this game, although I think it's technologically obsolete in more ways than one. But capitalism is strong. Capitalism is innovative. Capitalism is penetrating. Capitalism is vital. Capitalism is, it's all very masculine. Whereas the nanny state, the welfare state, it's very girly. It's very feminine, right? So welfare states are described as soft and weak and competitive. If we coddle people, we won't be able to compete. We'll be feminized. The boy economies will beat out the girl economies, and we'll all go down with them. And so this is the sense in which the effects are very contradictory. Capitalism kind of liberates women who decide that they don't want to be caregivers. Actually, can do pretty well in the U.S. labor market if they're unencumbered by children and they move into a traditionally male profession, and they're young. That younger cohort, they're basically earning pretty much what men can earn, right? The real source of gender differences in the US and in most of the advanced industrial countries is that women are specializing in unpaid and paid care, and a lot of the difference in their income is related to that difference. So, okay, this is a cartoon from The Economist. What is going on here? The British Conservative Prime Minister is going to downsize the welfare state by, I don't know what he's going to do, a cesarean or something. Yeah. But I think that's a pretty vivid image of the welfare state as a pregnant mother. And then here's just one more of the nanny state. Actually threatening the child, purporting to be pushing the stroller, but is actually this looming debt over future generations. And so it's not really helping future generations, it's loading them up with obligations that are going to bring them down. That's a part of the rhetoric. So that's why you get this woman saying, every morning I wake up on the wrong side of capitalism, because capitalist institutions need families, but they would prefer not to pay for them. It's a little bit like the environmental problems, where capitalism needs a stable climate, but capitalists don't want to pay for measures that might slow global warming, because they would cut that would impinge on their short-run profits. It's a very similar, the care economy, I think, is a very similar picture. And here again, international competition, it puts pressure on countries and companies to cut costs in a way that often means offloading environmental costs and also offloading care costs on whoever can be forced to pay for them. So that's why we need a care movement. That's why there's a talk and sort of growing efforts to build a kind of care movement. And a lot of this care movement has focused on family policy and wage policy for low-wage workers, childcare workers, and elder care workers in particular. And this brings me back to what I was saying. I think it also needs to focus on conventional theories of public finance. And this is my last substantive slide. I just want to give you an example of what I mean by this emphasis on public finance as a way of reframing some political debate. Has anyone here heard of Tax Freedom Day? Do you know what Tax Freedom Day is? Leo, what's Tax Freedom Day?
Bullshit.
Yes! Tax Freedom Day is the day in the year when, if starting January 1st, you took all your earnings and sent them to the government, didn't keep anything for yourself, by what day in the year would you have freed yourself of the burden of taxes and no longer be a slave? Obey slave. You would escape slavery. Well, in the US, in the aggregate, on average, about 30% of people's income goes to taxes, all forms of taxes. So about 30% through the year, January, February, March, usually early April, is Tax Freedom Day. And the Tax Foundation makes a big thing about this. Finally we're free! We're no longer enslaved! Because this money's not going to the government. So that's sort of the conservative framing of the welfare state. So here's an alternative framing. I call it tax payback year. By the time you reach age 21, how much have the taxpayers spent on you? And if you treated what the taxpayers had spent on you as a loan, which you were required to pay back with interest, modest rate of interest, modest rate, 3% rate of interest, real rate of interest, right? Let's say age 21, you take that amount of money and you treat it like a home mortgage. Okay, this is the amount that you've borrowed, and now you have to start paying it back, right? How long do you have to pay? It was sort of invented as part of a strategy to get a political constituency, to argue that people in the middle should vote with the top, and to split them from people at the bottom. And so, yeah, I agree with that. But I don't think that working class and capitalist class is not an adequate substitute, because I see a lot of people who are well-paid professionals and managers who are essentially human capitalists. They have an education, that allows them to enjoy a very privileged place in wage employment. And that, I don't think that traditional language gives us a way to identify that. So I'm not sure what the solution is, yeah.
I would say that it's a wedge. Like, it's a false place in a social dynamic that's not really there, and it's leverage for those who are actually in power to utilize the quote-unquote middle class against everyone else to create a distance mechanism. Like, if I can distance you from others, and I can keep you all fragmented, you will fight amongst each other while I'm at the top, still raking in the money. And if you really think about power and control, it's very divisive, and it's a war tactic.
Yeah,
If I
it
can
is,
get the
exactly,
individuals-
yeah.
You know, and that's the thing that I look at most of the time, is people have bought into the whole middle class mentality, forgetting that there's someone at the top controlling all the buttons and being a puppet master, while everyone else is kind of like, hey, I'm a middle class person, I don't really know about those lower class people. And those lower class people, they're kind of making it bad on the middle class. Where are you truly at?
Yeah, yeah,
You know?
yeah. Actually, the last time I gave a talk at CPE, it was about this. It was a little far-fetched, but it was about vampires versus zombies. And it fits with what you were saying, that people in the middle are the humans, and the vampires are the top 1% who are sucking their blood, and the zombies are kind of the shambling, aimless, undead, who are not very individually threatening, but there's so many of them that they can overpower you. And so, if you look at the whole discourse of vampires and zombies, vampires have kind of been idealized and romanticized. They're super strong, they're beautiful, they live forever. So they're sort of evil, but you're sort of fascinated by them anyway. Whereas zombies are kind of poor people who, are going to overwhelm you. And I think this is kind of the underlying political thing, is that, depicting the top 1% as predatory but heroic, and poor people as incompetent but threatening by their numbers, yeah.
Yes, I just want to see if we can make some clarification about a statement that was made that there is nothing like middle class. And I want to say I strongly disagree with that, because you do have a middle class, you do have an upper class, and you do have a lower class. In any country.
Yeah, you're right. I think you're right. There's always by definition a middle, but I think it gets used, and it gets used different ways in different places, but in the US, it gets used in a way that is very misleading. And it gets used to sort of include everybody that's good and decent, so that, everybody that's below the middle class is irresponsible, and everybody that's above the middle class is selfish. It's sort of defined in these very silly, almost cartoonish terms, rather than in terms of, if you just say what's happening to households with incomes in the middle 40% and define the middle class that way, yeah, you're right. By definition, there's a middle class.
Yes.
Well, in the example with members of Congress, when they were asked, okay, at what level should that, would people who are middle class be taxed? And now we're saying we won't tax the middle class, right? And people's idea of middle class was like people who make $500,000 or, 250. I mean, that was what they said. So it's completely, it just doesn't result in it. But one of the things that's interesting for me is that as a society, we claim to value care, but as a society, we empirically do not care all that much, either for the people who provide care or the people being cared for. I mean, I think that's fair to say in general.
Yeah, but the
that
question
most
is,
care work is grossly underpaid compared to comparable work, for instance.
Okay, but I just want to interrupt just a minute, because it's true, I think, what you're saying is true, but the question is why?
Yes.
Okay, and why is it? And I think one reason is that people have just, the legacy of patriarchy is, oh, that's family. That's family obligation and responsibility. Somebody else has a problem with their kids, that's their problem. Somebody else has a problem with their elderly, that's their problem. That's the kind of the legacy of patriarchy. The women should just take care of it. Okay. And the legacy of capitalism is, oh, the market takes care of it. Okay, the market may not work great, but the market is the only system that really works, and so we're stuck with it, and so the market is going to deal with it. So between those two things, people have constructed a kind of mental immunity, you know, to worrying about it.
Right.
So that's what we want to do, is figure out how to get them to see that, right? And that involves seeing through the gender stuff and also the market, class markets.
But even within sectors, if we say we value education, well, we value people who teach in college more per hour than we value people who teach, you know, in the grades
And it
more
should be
than
the other way
than
around.
people who teach,
Yeah.
you know, preschool, and a hell of a lot more than people who take care of infants. I mean, it's just stunning, you know, what those differences are, and there's no natural reason for it.
No, if anything,
Yeah.
they should get paid more, yeah.
Yeah.
There, if you measured the social consequences of teacher efficacy in preschool and in college, preschool teachers would probably get paid more. I don't mean to sound so pessimistic about my overall lifetime impact. There you go. Yes.
I want to ask something about this, about what I said before. They say we need to make the case for more equitable, efficient, and sustainable distribution of cost of care. They say, who take care of? To take care right now is the middle class, to pay more taxes to the rich people. That's because I say that.
Wait,
Because I learned that in one training I taken. The middle class is pay more taxes to the rich people than the middle class is the people to be paid for,
Yeah,
the
that's
program
right.
is now.
Yeah, there's a lot of class inequality in the distribution of taxes.
And it's shifted over the last 30 years.
It's absolutely shifted, and it's even worse on the state level than in the U.S. than on the federal level. Yeah, Emily.
I was wondering if you had any thoughts about other forms than national schemes of social insurance, like cooperative health insurance or mutual societies, life insurance. And just one other thing, some of these mutuals have been really successful, but now they just look like any other mass mutual, right? They just look like any other mega corporation. So is that a good way to go, or is a nationalized social insurance the way?
I think national social insurance is more efficient. I think the mutual aid societies and mutuals were an important stage in the development of social insurance, and I think they kind of they speeded the evolution of larger insurance systems. But I just think there's too much of a problem with adverse selection, it's just really hard. I mean, insurance, and you could see that in those early mutuals, you know, the people who needed it the least were the people who became a part of it, and the people who needed it most didn't join up. So I really think it makes sense to fund it on the national level. But I think in terms of provision, there is a really important role for more decentralized organizations and cooperative worker-based associations. And I think a really good model there is the Quebec social economy system, which provides state funding for essentially cooperative and community-based social services. So another example of that, I mean, you were talking about, several people were talking about Medicaid and Medicaid nursing home financing. In some states, And Oregon and Washington are a really good example. They've successfully moved almost all of the Medicaid budget into home and community-based care. So that allows people themselves to become the employers. They can hire whoever they want to come provide services in their home, and they're reimbursed through the state. And in general, they get much better, I mean, in general,
Yeah.
much better services than they do through nursing homes. And one exception is that people who really suffer from Alzheimer's or dementia often are better off in an institutional care because it's just really hard in a home to take care of them. But I think that's a really good example, and there are some differences among states that are really significant. The South is terrible. Most other states don't use Medicare for home and community-based care because they're afraid that more people will apply for it. And so they just, they know that nursing homes are so bad that very few people nobody will go to a nursing home unless they absolutely have to. Whereas home and community-based care you would apply for, you're not discouraged. And so southern states have just basically blocked it. But I think that's a really good model.
I know we're almost out of time, but in terms of social insurance, you think about something like Social Security, where there's employer contribution and individual contribution, or you think about something that's more independent, maybe the state-based, like the retirement systems that Teresa Diller didn't you advocate? Do you see a way for corporations or at least employers?
Well, I mean, I think the employer, most people see the employer portion of the Social Security tax as essentially being paid by the worker, because it's lowering the wages the worker is getting. So I'm not sure the employer is really paying it. But this sort of comes back to what we were talking about before. I think and I don't have the answer. I think it's a very good specific question. How could we design a system that requires employers and investors in general to pay their fair share of the costs? And it's a real challenge. That's, a really big challenge. You got a whole week to think about it. I'm sure you can come up with something. It's really been great talking with you. I'm happy to hang out and have some one-on-one and whatever, but it feels to me like this is a good spot to make a transition to more informal conversation. So thank you all very much.